On a June day near the town of Axtell, members of the Dahl family gathered to celebrate the visionary work of their ancestor, Reverend K.G. William Dahl.
Pastor Dahl came from southern Sweden in a fairly well-to-do family. His father was a Lutheran pastor.
By 1907, Dahl had followed his father's path and was ordained as a Lutheran minister in Illinois. He soon moved to Omaha, where he became friends with a man he simply called Gustav. He was a man who would fuel the passion of Dahl's life.
I would surmise he's probably a person that had a mental illness, not a developmental disability, but he had been locked at the county poor farm and actually kept in a locked unit. Pastor Dahl visited him. He had no clothes, he had no food, he'd been mistreated, and Gustav begged Pastor Dahl in Swedish to take him from that place.
But it was something Dahl was not in the position to do, and it haunted him for the rest of his life.
He just believed that the church should fulfill this need that society had to include people at the margins.
Dahl began researching institutional care for people living on the edge of society.
Unfortunately, people with disabilities were oftentimes seen as the sign of some sort of genetic flaw. And of course, we didn't know enough about genetic or acquired causes for any kinds of disabilities. And so there was shame attached to some of it. The state facility, for years, people were buried with numbers on their graves instead of with names. It happened in many states.
In late 1912, a small church in Axtell needed a pastor and hired Dahl. When he arrived, he saw opportunity.
He became impressed with the fact that this would be a good place to have an organization, to meet the kinds of human needs that had become a real burden to his heart.
Dahl shared his vision with his congregation of creating a home for the disabled.
People weren't sure whether or not he would be successful, but the sentiment seemed to be, it's worth a try.
54 members gave $1 each. In 1912 money, $1 would buy a week of groceries for a family of 4. Within 3 years, the first home was dedicated on the present site of Bethany Village.
It was really faith-based organizations which took the lead in social causes, and not only developmental disabilities, but in many other aspects of social needs.
But as Dahl's mission was taking shape, he became ill and died from a heart condition. It was 1917, and he was only 34 years old.
I can remember riding on his shoulders as a little, and he died when I was just 2 years old.
The loss was hard, but Dahl's pioneering work at Bethany Village continued, as yet another Lutheran charity was taking shape in another small Nebraska town.
Martin Luther Homes began in 1925 in Sterling.
Granddad was one of the 5 founders. He was cut from that traditional German paterfamilias kind of model, and I think ran a pretty tight ship at home, but obviously was a man of compassion.
5 men of Lutheran faith but of German heritage organized a groundbreaking school for children with disabilities.
The word got out within the German Lutheran community that they were beginning Martin Luther, and people arrived to be served before the work on the school was done.
The school quickly filled with children from near and far, and with the support of many communities and many faiths, it flourished.
There was a newsletter that circulated and unabashedly asked for money and for soap and for clothing and for canned goods and school supplies and just everything.
The support that came from people, even during the Depression, who had little to nothing, the farmers who gave of their crops, the women who came and canned.
In 1953, Martin Luther Homes moved to its present location in Beatrice. With growing demand for good homes and schools for people with disabilities, the work of both Martin Luther Homes in Beatrice and Bethany Mission in Axtell, expanded beyond Nebraska.
I think both organizations were ahead of their time. In fact, I know they were. Martin Luther Home provided a state-of-the-art educational facility. Much before special education was required, at Bethany, we had therapeutic services such as physical therapy, occupational therapy. We had a program that you would now think of as a special education program before it was ever required. So both organizations have a rich history of just doing what I would say is the right thing well before it was required by law or regulation.
Thank you. Roger. You want to help me out? Want to help me fold up this shirt? Do it back for me. Doing good.
What's this guy's name? Brian. Hi, Brian. How are you?
In 2003, the two Nebraska-grown Lutheran charities decided it was time to unite into a single nonprofit, and they called it Mosaic.
I'm saving my money for my next vacation for 2014.
There you go.
Where are you going?
That's one I cannot tell. And,
Are you going to use a camper and go to the mountains?
yes, I probably
Now
will.
you spilled your secret.
Well, no, you spilled my secret. And Margie always spilling my secret on me.
We have 36 agency offices
Okay, good job.
in 10 states across the United States. I am a temporary caretaker, as are all the 5,000 employees of Mosaic, of a legacy that went on for 100 years before us and will go on hopefully for 100 or more after us. Served at Mosaic, I want to welcome you to this grand occasion to celebrate 100 years of service and advocacy.
I'm Donna Thompson, and we drove to Kearney from Texas. Bethany Mosaic has taken care of my son for 24 years, and they have done an excellent job.
Axtell, Nebraska, 10 februari 1913. Kära syster Lisa, hjärtligt tack för ditt kära brev. Jag ska snart
We would say
bevara
Betfage.
Betfage. Our grandmother said Betfage. We have learned to say Betfage.
It's a bit
So,
troublesome.
Yeah, we do our best.
Yeah.
Our grandmother really kept this chain between Sweden and Betfage very alive. Our parents went out here to see this, and our aunt, and now our elder sisters, granddaughters have connection.
We hope to visit in June. Your affectionate brother, William.
Okay, those of you who haven't been here before, it will be a little different, but that's all right. You'll make it through it.
I was asked what makes this place special. And all I can think about is it's the people. It's just this community that's been created.
Built in 1916 and still standing strong, this venerable building is a symbol of service and love.
80 years ago, we weren't speaking the same language. We had a different heritage. Now, 80 years later, we're speaking the same language. We're starting from the same kind of place with the same kind of premises. And we will do better working together than we would do working separately.
May the history that is shared within it.
I had high expectations for this weekend, but the lid's been blown off of that. This has exceeded everything that I ever hoped would happen. It all began here, and this Midwest ethic of loving and caring for your neighbor continues today.
I adore what everybody is doing with me, and I do appreciate that.
There you have it.
Yes.
All right, you want to go?
Thank you, Margie.
You're welcome.
And aren't you full of surprises?
No, you are.